Afternoon. It is the 5th of January, 2021, and this is the first meeting of the month of the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee. We will come to order. We have a quorum present, and we have Mr. Paschal online. And is Mr. Handler out there? No. Okay. Mr. Handler is not there. Okay. First up is identify any potential conflicts of interest. You've got the packet in front of you. If there's any issue you feel you might have a conflict on, please feel free to notify the committee of it now. Anybody? Nope. So we'll move on to the next thing, citizens' comments. And I see we've drawn our usual overflow crowd. So there's nobody here for citizen comments, so we'll move on. And to the consent agenda for the minutes of December 15th, 2020. The monthly position control report, and the bills and payroll. What were your wishes? Motion by Spiros, second by Paschal to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Motion carries 4-0. Next up is there are no items removed from the consent agenda. And that's to request to recommend council approval to refill a vacant part-time position in the library department, presented by Jill Porter. Jill, what do you got?
Thank you, Chairman Wagner. Happy New Year to everyone. As outlined in my memo, I am seeking approval to refill a part-time library assistant position. This person works out of our technical services department and is responsible for getting all of our items shelf ready. Many of our items do not come with protective covers on them, so this person applies the protective covers to both DVDs, CDs. They also add security tagging and the spine labels that allow the community and staff members to find the materials. Since the employee resigned in mid-November, staff have been able to pick up many of these responsibilities in between their other duties. The primary reason they've been able to do this is because most of our items for 2020 had already been received and processed. We were just receiving a few stragglers for the last 6 weeks or so. Since 2021 has arrived, a backlog of materials have started to arrive, and we would really like to get this position filled as it's becoming a bit of a burden on other staff members. This position was budgeted for in 2020-21 and was approved by the library board to be refilled. At 19 hours a week, the person receives no vacation time or sick leave. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about the position and would seek your approval to fill this position.
And what is your pleasure? Mr. Paschal?
Motion to approve.
Second by Ms. Spiros. And yeah, you had her hand up earlier. Yes, Tom?
Thank you. A couple quick questions. I noticed in your memo that you're currently down a bit in staffing. Your memo states that you have 2 open temporary positions and 1 open part-time position, and those remain open?
Yes, they do. These are the positions we froze as part of the budget cuts for 2021.
And moving forward, your plan is to leave those frozen until such time as the library begins to open up again more than it currently is?
Yes, and hopefully through 2021, we did make the commitment to the board, the Common Council, not to fill those positions because of the budget cut.
All right, that's all I had. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? We have a motion and a second to approve the recommendation to the council to refill a part-time library position in the library department. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Nick, you voted yes?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes 4-0. Thank you. Thank you, Jill. Next one, request to authorize Human Resources Director to review and make recommendations regarding STIP-based compensation adjustments for Equipment Operator 1 and similar positions in the street division. Jen, it's all yours.
Thank you. So you may recall a while ago, I came forward with a request to this body to go forward and have an evaluation conducted by McGrath for the EO1 and EO2 positions. That request was really based upon some information that staff had provided in regard to some comparables that are in our area where they felt we were falling behind. So that was submitted and reviewed by McGrath. And it's important to note when you're looking at some of those comparables, it is important to look at the fact that our compensation philosophies are different between these other municipalities that were reviewed. One in particular has a very straight compensation philosophy. They pay one rate regardless of how long someone has been in the position. It was just a flat rate all the way across. The other one is a little more comparable to us. In looking at this and the review that McGrath did, what it indicated is that the equipment operator 1 range might be starting to fall behind the market. The EO2, equipment operator 2, was actually still comparable though. So as we look at these, as you know, we didn't do a scale adjustment in 2020. We're not anticipating doing that in 2021 based on the approved budget. And so we do, though, consider the steps still in place. And so those steps are continuing, which is a good thing. I'm not saying the fact that we didn't adjust the scales is the only contributor to this, but it might be one part of the contributor, or it might just be that these types of labor-based positions are starting to increase in the market. So in working with the consultant, the city really has 2 options. The first one is probably more obvious, that we would increase the pay grade from 123 where it sits today to pay grade 124. The issue with that is that if we were to increase that pay grade when this scale was built back in 2017, 2018, there was a 2 pay grade difference, or a 10% adjustment in between those 2 steps to separate out the skills between an equipment operator 1 and an equipment operator 2. And so if we were to compress that and keep them in pay grades 124 and 125 instead of 123 and 125, it would lead to compression and would likely have a kind of a follow-up effect where we would have to look at the compensation for all of those positions in terms of how they would fall, even if the EO2 right now is not falling behind market. So the other option that we have, and the recommended option, would be to be a little more flexible with the current pay ranges. And ultimately what that would be is to look at the people that are currently in an equipment operator 1 role. And actually, I think the best route would be to include the street division positions that are in pay grade 123, because in the wintertime, you know, there is some overlap, but ultimately it would be positions within the department in pay grade 123, which is the inventory assistant / operator and the equipment operator 1. We would look to potentially move them up 1 step in the pay scale. Now, this wouldn't necessarily eliminate the pay increase that they would get otherwise in July, or the step increase that they would get in July. This would be 1 additional step that could be put in place this year. So in looking at the recommendation that's included in your packet, this isn't a decision that you want to make lightly. We do want to follow a standard process if we would put this type of change in place where we could increase people in the pay grade. And what that would include would be to have a documented review, which we've done in this case with McGrath as a third-party consultant, and then watch for patterns of recruitment or retention concerns in regard to specific classifications, and really have more of a documented formal process that would go through before we would make any type of market adjustments like the one I'm recommending here. We would want to make sure that we're consistent both with this position and then anytime we would make any market adjustments in the future. When we brought forward this request, at that time we had 2 equipment operator 1 positions resign and 1 equipment operator 2. And as you know, our assistant street superintendent had also recently retired. And so when we looked at those, you know, we did have 2 that decided to go on to alternate employment, 1 employee determined to be self-employed. And so that type of turnover is high. But over the past probably 6 months to a year, we have seen an increase in turnover in these particular positions. It's probably been the position that we've recruited for the most, as evidenced most recently by your many visits from Chris Hawley. So in looking at that, I did meet with Chris and we looked at kind of a summary of this. What we would recommend, almost all of our equipment operator 1s and our current inventory assistant have been here within less than 5 years or close to in that pay range. They're all fairly newer hires. What we would anticipate is moving them up a step. If you might recall the percentage between steps between 1 and 5 is a 2.5% increase. So they would get that 2.5% increase if this is approved at whatever date you would approve, and we would look probably to put that forward going forward. We'd want to actually give you a hard dollar amount before we'd actually approve this. But just so you have an idea, we're probably talking in about a $10,000 cost to make this adjustment from a yearly basis, prorated by whenever this would actually go into play. Other than that, in looking at the compensation review done by McGrath, you might recall back in 2018 when we put this in place, they did recommend that a market study is done every 3 to 5 years, not a full salary review like we did the last time, not changing the salary structure or those types of things, but looking at, excuse me, specific positions to determine if we have some positions that need a review to make sure that we're staying market competitive as we're going forward. And if that's the case, there might be some adjustments. That 5-year window is going to come at the end of 2022, likely to be implemented in 2023 if you choose to go that way. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. I know Chris Hawley was also planning to join in the event that there were questions for him. Not certain if he has or not, but I'm happy to take those questions as well.
Questions? Mr. Witzel?
Thank you. I have a lot of questions that come to mind. So I'll start rattling off. You said that there were comparables done. Again, I question, is this comparables to other public and similar, or is this public and private? Private? Are we looking at comparables?
There were 2 municipalities that brought the request forward. The information from 2 municipalities, one being Stevens Point, one being Rapids.
Okay, so we only did a comparative to those 2.
Well, what we did is that was what initiated the scenario, and then we sent it to McGrath. And McGrath did a bit more of a review, not a full market review on the whole position, but they looked at comparables and looked at compensation philosophies that were gained when they did the market study.
And that's, I guess, what I was wondering is, did McGrath do a comparative to other public, or to public and private, or to just private, or what did they do behind their magical?
So much like was done in the past, I believe it was likely primarily the public sector.
Okay.
That has been where they had received most of their information back in 2018.
The thing that you mentioned that jumps out at me is the fact that our EO1 at 123 is low, but our EO2 125 is comparable.
Mm-hmm.
So if you said if we move the 123s to 124, it compresses it too much, yet it seems as though the market is showing there's a compression.
It does.
So,
there could be a bit of that, but when we had put the scale in place initially, we felt that there was enough difference of positions between those 2 to keep that separation there, to encourage people to continue to move forward. Not that wouldn't necessarily happen if it was a 124 to a 125, but.
Okay. And real quick, what is the difference between the steps of 123 to 124 to 120? Percentage difference?
I didn't do the math in terms of the exact percentages between the scales, but on average it was a 10% adjustment.
To go
How much was
10%
that,
increase?
10% between a step in 123 and 125.
Oh, between the double step would be a 10%, so approximately 5% per. Okay, and you said it was a $10,000 salary, or is that a total package?
Total package. So what I looked at in that, in just really round numbers, most of our hires are probably between step 1 and step 3. Step 2 is $20.38 an hour. So rounding it to just $20 an hour, knowing that a 2.5% increase would be about 50 cents per hour, and then multiplied that by a full-time employee, not counting overtime, not counting additional hours. But it was just slightly under $10,000.
Okay. I guess one final question, and then I guess one comment after that. Are there others that are on the 123 besides EO1?
There's an EO1, and then for the street division, it's an equipment operator. An inventory assistant / operator. And that I would recommend, if you would choose to go forward with this, that we would include that position.
So really, everybody that's on 123, we're looking at bumping up.
Yep.
As
so there would
opposed to
be
changing 123.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
Because okay, so we have people at 123 that are underpaid. So the only option you're really giving us is either to move them to 124 or to take everybody on 123 and bump them up a couple of steps or a step or whatever it would be, rather than adjusting 123 to be more market compatible.
Correct. So there are other positions that are in pay grade 123
That's what I'm
outside of
wondering.
the street division.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
Yep, I believe it's administrative assistants or administrative associates.
Okay, so there are others that would be
there are.
impacted outside the street department. Okay.
Correct.
The only other comment I want to make is that if we had implemented a raise, that would actually further differentiate these two, because a 2% raise on a certain amount and a 2% raise on a higher amount, it's going to further separate those. So I'm not sure that we're necessarily looking at the best option or the best plan for moving forward on.
Well, and the concern is a couple, you know, I mean, so if you look at, if we do the step increases, that will certainly give some differentiation to people that are in the position now. It doesn't change, you know, the entire division, you know, in terms of compression or looking at compressionary issues within there. So that is one solution, and why it's a recommendation to move forward in this now. I think we do need to continue to monitor the equipment operator 1 to see if it is something that needs to remain in that pay scale. We're doing a recruitment for it currently, and we haven't had a lack of applicants that have just come in. The last 2 recruitments, the applications had been down quite a bit, and whether that's due to COVID or different things, it may be there. But we also have had some turnover in those positions, which has caused some concern in terms of whether or not the starting rate of pay is too low for that position. And so the ability that we would have to continue to attract new people to that role is to potentially be a little more flexible in terms of where we're bringing people in on that scale for a new hire, somebody that comes in that's of similar experience, of course, not leapfrogging anyone else that has been with us, but ultimately we might need to start looking at bringing people in at a slightly higher step. Right now, you've authorized me to hire between steps 1 and steps 5, and we've been pretty consistent with that.
Becky, I'll give it over to you before I comment. Go ahead.
So my question, and I apologize, is there a job?
I didn't include it in the packet only because the job itself hasn't changed at all. It was really just the weight.
Oh, so I wonder, what are the requirements? What is the basic requirement?
Yeah, so ultimately there is a CDL that's required for it. So when we recruit, there's a high school diploma required. If they've got heavy equipment experience, that's always a benefit. If they've got experience with concrete or ditching or some of those types of things, those are all things that we look for when we're going through candidates. In regard to, you know, advanced education, that isn't something that's typically required. CDL is required. If we do have somebody that comes in without a CDL to start with, we certainly will consider them, but we require them to get that within the first 6 months. And they actually come in at the street maintenance position, which is actually in pay grade 120. We bring them in at midpoint, which is $18.35 an hour. And then as soon as that CDL is obtained, we move them to step 1 of the pay grade.
Do we pay for the CDL?
We don't pay for the CDL. They have to do that on their own. However, we do help them with the ability to utilize our equipment to train so that when it comes time to test that they're ready, since those types of equipment are not typically available just to the common person.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Something Jen said here has been ringing in my ears since I saw this on the agenda. And that is, we've had a lot of turnover over there. And the assumption we're making right now is that the reason we're having a high turnover is all because of wages. In my experience, it's never just because of something like that. Chris is online right now. And Chris, do we have a management problem over there? Do we have problems with holding on to EO1s and EO2s? What's going on?
Well, I think there's a couple things. I think the market right now for somebody who in this position is in high demand. Basically, you get somebody that's somewhat skilled in the construction industry. They're able to kind of pick and choose right now, and I really think that's a market thing.
Well, I'll tell you, the thing that traditionally, and as for all the years that I've been involved in government, one of the most plum jobs that a guy that was an equipment operator or a contractor type would want is a job with the city, because I don't think anybody beats our benefits. We've got probably the best retirement program around. We've got the best health insurance program around. That's why I can't imagine why, first of all, there aren't people clamoring to get the job as a city street department person, one operator one, operator two, what have you. And secondly, why anybody would leave once they got there. Have we looked at that? Chris, have you looked at that? Have you done an internal look to see what's going on? Have you done exit interviews with these guys?
Actually, Jen takes care of the exit interviews. I think one of the things, Mr. Wagner, is that now that health insurance is kind of balanced out in the industry now, everybody's pretty much on a high deductible health plan. Of course, our most attractive benefit here is of course our Wisconsin retirement system. You hire somebody kind of new, in youngers in their mid to late 20s or 30s, they don't see the light at the end of the tunnel for that benefit. So I think it's more of an hourly wage thing than anything.
Well, I'd like to think that's the case, but again, to a carpenter, every problem looks like a nail and every solution looks like a hammer, and I guess in HR it looks like a compensation plan. So I'm a little, and I don't see any really good options here. I really don't. So I'm sort of undecided on this at the moment. So yeah, Mr. Witzel, do we want to be recognized?
Thank you. Oh, I guess I turned my mic off. Now it's back on. Thank you. Just a real quick follow-up regarding the concern of the compression between the two positions and the need to make sure that those that are attaining new skills and are being then compensated for the new skills are finding what they're hoping to find. Do we ever hire EO2s, or do we always hire EO1s and then move them up to EO2s?
In the past several years, we've done more of a progression where people would come in at EO1 and EO2. I can tell you the most recent recruitment that we're doing, we are hiring for both an EO1 and an EO2.
Okay. And are we looking at what we have in our EO1 pool of employees to see if those EO1s that have worked for us and have shown some level of dedication, even if it's 5 years, are eligible to move up into that EO2? Or
yeah, there isn't a time frame that's on it. In fact, over the course of the last probably 2 to 3 years, and Chris can clarify as well, I have seen a number of EO1s move up into EO2 positions. Really, some of our, I want to say, newer hires, which to me that would be those hired within the last 3 or 4 years. And so we have seen an increase in that specifically more recently. What I can tell you is when I first started, it seemed like we had a very long longevity track within our street division. The majority of people that turned over were due to retirement. However, in the last couple of years, that has changed. We've seen more people that have come in, and the market just, maybe isn't the same. And when I say market, I'm not talking about the job. I'm talking about people that are in the market, that they're coming in and they're just not necessarily staying as long. We've had people that have turned over within a couple of months. We've had people that have turned over in a few years. Part of that, I think, when we were talking about benefits before, people aren't vested until they get to 5 years. So that string to stay with the retirement plan, if they don't think they're going to be here the 5 years regardless, that might not be a plan for them. However, our goal is to get them there and to hire them and keep them on long term. And that's really how we had set up our compensation strategy and our structure and our pay system.
Okay. When we do promote people, which it sounds like the majority of EO2s are the promotion method, I know that there's a rule, and it's eluding me right now what that rule is, but if they're going from one step to another, regardless of what position, it's always move them up in the same step. But if that step doesn't yield a certain percentage, then we also bump them up the next step to make sure they yield a certain percentage of increase. Is that correct?
Well, yes and no. So in the past, if you think of our old compensation plan, when we promoted from within, they were on a step, and if they promoted, they stayed within that same rung of the step and whatever the new pay grade was. that isn't the case any longer. The new promotional guidelines that we put in, someone who is promoted gets either a 5% increase or a movement to the minimum of that pay grade if it's greater than 5%. So that's what we have. And we have a little bit of flexibility, in that, of course, to make sure that we're getting people where they need to be. But ultimately, that's kind of the rule of thumb, 5% or to the minimum of the next step.
Okay, so just again, to make sure I'm understanding completely here, and the memo that you provided, you gave us pay grade 123 and pay grade 1 fair. And so if I'm EO1 sitting at step 5 and I'm getting promoted, I'm not going to step 1 of 25. I'm not even going to step 2 of 25. I'm going up enough to guarantee that 5% increase.
It would be a 5% increase for sure. Although what we did is we built into the policy, depending on where that person is and the amount of experience that they have, it should be a 5% increase. It might be a little more, it might be a little less, but we try to stay right around that 5% mark. And we do try to keep people on full steps. If you remember when we first put this plan in, we had everyone sitting in between steps, and that was hard for employees to comprehend where they were in the scale and what type of increase they would get the next year. And ultimately, the harder part of that is, depending on where they fell in between steps, when the July 1st increases would come along and they'd move to the step, they wouldn't get the whole 2.5% increase, or they'd only move, a few cents, if you remember, in that first year, if they were higher with that adjustment. So we try to keep them on, we do try to keep them on steps, but again, it might be a little bit more or a little bit less than 5%.
Okay, so if we are targeting though a 5% increase in promotion, would it matter if they start at 124 and then get promoted to a 125, guaranteed a 5% increase? I mean, is there really that big a deal with that?
The only downfall to that is depending on where they were on the scale when they get promoted in comparison to somebody who has been in that role maybe for a little bit longer. So let's say that we have an EO1 who has 8 years of experience with us, they're higher up in the scale. They would still get the 5%, which would be the case, but there might be people who have been in the EO2 for a significant amount of time, maybe not 8 years, but maybe 3 years or 5 years doing that equipment operator 2 role. That would then cause some compression there, and we'd have to look at that to ensure that we're being fair to all of the employees.
Ms. Spiros.
Thank you, Chair. Jen, is there any worry of compression if we did this? Is there any worry of compression between the EO2 and the position that would be above an EO2, which maybe there isn't even a position? I don't know.
There are limited positions. So we have a specialized equipment operator that is in a pay grade 126, and I believe I would have to pull the pay grade, but there's a fleet supervisor as well who kind of manages the stockroom area. Doesn't supervise people, supervises a process, but I believe they're at a 127. So we do have a couple of steps in addition. And so that is one thing that you do want to keep in mind in terms of if we would have too much compression between 124 and 125, that then do you also end up adjusting 126 and 127. Although, there are about 8 or 9 people in equipment operator 2 positions, I believe 2 specialized equipment operators, 1 fleet supervisor. So we're about, we're split pretty even between equipment operator 1s and equipment operator 2s, but I believe in the last year we promoted 1 of those equipment operator 2s into a specialized equipment operator. So got a little bit of variance.
Okay, and then just as a follow-up, if I may, I have one other just comment kind of question. We have had a lot of turnover. I mean, we have seen Chris's face up here at our podium quite often. Can you talk about how expensive it is to constantly have turnover and train new employees? What is the expense? I mean, from my perspective, when you bring in a new nurse, it's very expensive. Mm-hmm. The training is very long and it's very expensive. If they go and they quit in 6 months, you've really absorbed a huge cost of training that first person. So have you guys looked at that? And if so, are there any figures you can attach to that?
Yeah, I don't have a figure for you today. I could certainly pull that together. But if you think of this from the standpoint, and as our new software goes in, some of the costs, I guess, would cut down. But to review our process in general, right now we get our applications in, we manually review them, I review them to determine, top candidates versus maybe those that aren't qualified. Those are also reviewed by the hiring manager to make that determination. We typically interview 3 to 5, sometimes 6, depending on the position, top candidates. Of those top candidates, then we select our top candidate. References are completed on that on that individual. And then we do all the pre-employment hiring, so the physicals and the drug screens and all of those things. So there's certainly a cost to it. The highest cost is going to be in time, because when we're talking about those interviews in particular, it's typically with myself, with the street superintendent. Typically, when we have to, both assistant street superintendents are included, and that's just for those positions. Depending on the scenario, there have been times where we've included the public works director, and we've also included, potentially some others.
Wouldn't there
Just make
also
sure
be
we're-
an orientation period where the person is following somebody else in the department?
So that's just to get them in the door, and I can certainly let Chris respond to how they work after that.
Chris, do you want to respond?
Ms. Spiros, anytime you lose somebody especially after retirement, who's been here for 30 years, and you pull somebody in new, you lose a lot of knowledge, big time. So what we do is we bring the new person in. Each job shadow it really depends on qualifications too. He job shadows for at least a week or two or whatever, and then if he's got a qualified truck driver, he's already out on the road hauling snow or hauling fill or working raking dirt or something like that. So typically, as far as orientation for a new employee, it really depends on their skill set.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll tell you, Jen, everything I'm seeing here leads to a complete review of that whole, of the whole structure for the operator. I don't see any way out of it. You're going to compress one way or the other. You're going to compress either from one class to the next, or within a class if you promote somebody up there and they're making more, they're at a higher step, as you described a few minutes ago. I just don't see any way around it. My problem with that is these things never go down, they go up. All the pay scales go up. And we just went through a really tough budget time. And I don't know if we've got the budget this year to do that. I really don't. I'm not sure that we have enough slack in that budget to absorb. Okay, if this were just one slot, or if this were just one person, or maybe two, $10,000, we've got money, we can do that. But my God, if we end up doing the whole pay scale, we're talking about 6 figures. And I don't think we can do that.
Thank you. I'm not opposed to figuring out something. Just to comment on some of the comments that I'm hearing discussed in the issue of longevity and people staying in a position, it's not happening in society now. It's not just street operators, it's not just city employees, it's across the gamut. I think the millennials and the younger folks that are coming in, it's less about putting down the roots. It's more about where can I get the most money? And I think that there's this new approach that every time I change jobs, every time I get a different job with a different company, it's the raise. So, they'll come in, whether it's here, whether it's a private sector job, whatever, they'll get some base level experience. And then they make themselves more appealing to the next employer. And they'll apply and they'll get a boost in their money because they're coming in with a certain amount of experience. And they'll just keep job hopping for a number of years, because each time they job hop, they're bringing to that new employer a string of experiences that new employer appreciates and gives them a raise for. And so I think this idea, and, thinking back to the old days where, if I worked in the factory, I'm working in the factory till I retire, and I'm committed to the factory and I'm going to stay there, and my kid's probably going to work there too. That's not the case anymore. And I think society is becoming more mobile to the point where it's just as easy to pull up roots, head somewhere else, make some more money doing something different. So I don't know that a compensation is going to solve that problem. I think it's just society now. So, like I said, I'm not opposed. It gets a little confusing with, I guess, kind of what you're thinking. I guess I would rather just say, let's move to the next scale and we'll worry about the compression at a future time. I don't know what that impact would have. I don't know that I have the numbers here of what would happen if we did a bump up to a 124 instead of a 123. Without that information, I guess really the only thing we have to choose from is whether we're going to do a flexible option that you're providing to us or pick it for another meeting to discuss further.
Jen, go ahead.
Sure, I'd like to respond if I could. Ultimately, what we're asking for, and I probably wasn't clear when I ended my my review. Ultimately, tonight, we're actually not asking you to make a decision. What we're asking for is to further evaluate this and come back to you with numbers. Now, I was certainly hoping that we would have a scenario in terms of which numbers to figure out, but it wouldn't be unheard of to do both an adjustment to pay grade 124 and an adjustment to a step in pay grade 123, and then bring that back to you before we put this in. The other piece that we look to you for is, when you would like to make this effective. If you would choose to go forward with it, it certainly doesn't have to be February. What we had kind of lined out, or what I had lined out, was by the end of first quarter 2021 to look at this to ensure that we're making a fair decision.
Chris, did you still want to be recognized?
Yes, thank you. Alderman Witzel had some great points there. I just wanted to state the fact that the city of Marshfield isn't isolated in this type of public works street division problem. Talking with other communities, Rapids and Wausau and Stevens Point, and all the guys I talked to throughout the state, everybody seems to have, in the last year to 2 years, is having a high turnover rate with recruitment issues. So it's not just isolated to the city of Marshfield.
Jen, do we have any other departments where you have a high turnover rate?
Not to what we've seen in the street division lately.
What would be second place in the sweepstakes there? Just to guess, top off your head.
We've had some turnover shifting within our admin assistant positions. So we've had some shifting there. That would be probably number 2. Third would probably be a tie for every other department in the city.
Okay, thank you. And then Mr. Wetzel, I see your hand.
All right, and on that comment, I'm going to make one comment, then I'm going to actually make a motion. So here we go. My one comment is that I think street department is a little bit unique in that there's a pretty large private sector that is comparable. Don't know that there's a whole lot of private sector police department or private sector other things. So I don't know that we're going to see that same kind of turnaround. The biggest turnaround we would see there is municipality to municipality more than public to private type of thing. So I'm going to make a motion, and I would like the staff to go ahead and come up with some options. Again, I'm not certain this is going to be the silver bullet that resolves our issues, but I would like to see some options brought to us, whether it be some step adjustments, rung adjust, I don't know what you call them. Moving from, let me use the right verbiage here, from a step 1 to a step 2, making adjustments that way, making adjustments pay grade 123 to 124, or it's going to be really, really messy. What about an option of pay grade 123 and a half? So that would be my motion to just come back with some numbers and some options.
I don't think 123 and a half is included in the motion. I think that's optional on yours, Jen. Don't worry.
Okay.
Is there a second? Second by Ms. Spiros. Okay. Discussion. By the way, you're going to have McGrath do this, or you're going to work with McGrath on this now?
So we've worked with them a bit already. What I would do is I would put the dollars to the options that we're talking about. We wouldn't need McGrath to necessarily do that. They're great from a consultant standpoint. If I had a few other ideas that we can throw in the hopper, I'd probably run those past them, but that would be the extent.
And there's a charge for this, or?
Right now, there wouldn't be.
Okay. All right. We have a motion and a second on the floor, and I won't try and repeat it, and I won't even ask Deb to repeat it. But basically, it's let Jen do what she wants to do. That's it. That's pretty much it. So, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I'm going to say no. Yeah, I just have to be the one. You're right. Okay. All right. Jen, you got anything else? Is that it?
That was it. Thank you.
Okay. Suggested items for future agendas. Anybody? Oh, hi, Steve.
Hi,
By the way,
thank you.
look
And
awful.
I apologize. What?
By the way, you look awful, but that's all right.
Thank you. I don't feel all that good, so thank you. I'm glad I look as good as I feel. Anyway, I apologize. First of all, earlier I thought I had my self view hidden while I was moving around here, and I was Ing let me know that I was on camera, so I apologize for that. Two quick things with the next meeting. If you remember back in May or June, Justin Casperson came forward with a request to fill a vacant pool technician position, and at that time the committee said, well, we're not anywhere near opening the new pool. How timely is it? So that is what you're going to see as one of the items on the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee agenda for the next meeting. I just wanted to pass that along to the committee.
Thanks, Steve. Anybody else?
Yep.
Oh, by the way, you got a nice looking dog. You should feed him. That's all.
Okay, so now I feel really humiliated that you could see what was going on behind me. I really thought I had my self view off, but apparently not. Yes, I have a 4-month-old golden doodle, and yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, there being no further business, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.